Welcome to Season 4 of the Vulnerable Power Show, a deep dive into the heart and soul of leadership, where we spotlight visionary leaders, spiritual entrepreneurs, innovative executives, and New Earth pioneers who have all done the inner work and soul searching to transform and step into their greater calling and mission, here to make a big impact for collective good. We will share and explore vulnerable insights and potent wisdom in our heart-centered dialogues, so you too can be equipped for the future paradigm unfolding today. Be empowered with the skills, tools, and practices so you too can do the transformative work and be the ascending leader you came here to be. Together, let's bring more heart and soul back to leadership around the world. Greetings and welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Season 4 of the Vulnerable Power Show. 4 years in, and we have a returning guest from Season 2, a fellow teacher, Birgit Penzenstadler. And we last left her at the stage of her journey when she was tapping into bliss and breathwork and opening up as a teacher on the global stage, both in her formal work, which we talked about on the second season. We talked about sustainability and technology. And since then, Birgit has dived deeper into this, let's say, ascending leadership journey. And if you have never joined us before, what is this show all about? We're all about bringing heart and soul to leadership, showing the, let's say, the paradigm unfolding for us all, this new way of leadership. And since then, I know for you, my life got even more messy. So today I brought Birgit back to talk more about breath work and how we can use it as a tool to breathe through the messy. What is it like as we go deeper? What is this concept of surrendering and this inevitability of, as we do this inner work, things tend to fall apart more. They get a little crazier. And since last time, I know you worked with another person who was on the show. We've had all these synchronicities and synergies. You met up with Manya. You did some cosmic blueprint work, which we talked about after your episode in Season 2 with Manya. She's going to also be on this season. So it's been a really beautiful synergy and, let's say, a alchemical cauldron on the show the last few seasons. So Birgit, I know you're excited to jump into this, and I know you're excited to tell us how everything's been since the last time we saw you. So first of all, I'm really grateful that you're here, really grateful that you're willing to go deeper and talk to us about some of the more messy subjects and how we can use practical tools. So thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for sharing yourself with us and opening up more.
Thank you for having me. I am super excited to be back and grateful for the space here and looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, one of the things that I messaged you is I said, and this dropped in, and not during our first episode, this dropped in since then, which was this notion that I really didn't see the first time when we really connected, which was this concept of, I too felt, looking back at our episode, preparing for this episode and kind of dropping in, that a lot of what I wanted to talk about today and kind of unpack the theme, shall I say, is breathing through the messy. And one of the passion projects I know you have is teaching engineers in higher education. So one of the, let's say, themes, sub-themes for me is how I used to be a recovering engineer, how I was a technocrat, and how I'd really lost my heart. And I know for you, we had already touched on this in the first episode, this notion of what your journey looked like. So I wanted to really start with, what's the last 2 years been like for you in terms of what's unfolded? Where do you feel inspired to kind of bring us up to speed before we get into the nuts and bolts of today's episode? What has it been like in terms of how things have unfolded for you? How have you been surrendering more, so to speak, for lack of a better description? If you want to kind of start there, bring everybody up to speed.
Yes. I feel like it's been quite a roller coaster these past 2 years on pretty much all levels, on the professional levels and activities that I've been involved in. I've bridged into new places that I didn't know I was ever going to touch. Like, I got invited into doing some gender equity work, and now I'm getting a lot of requests for that. So I get to carry the healing modalities and the well-being and resilience awareness into those areas as well, where it's super crucial and super supportive. I have traveled quite a bit for work, being able to speak about this new research of integrating well-being into engineering and technology. And I remember in the last episode, I was still a bit cautious about, I wonder how research world is going to think about that. It turns out the more convinced I show up to tell the story and explain why this makes sense and why this matters, and the better I can translate in between the different worlds, the more accepting people are. And it turns out it's very successful. And I'm branching out in several areas with students who come to me and say, I want to study specifically this with you for my master's thesis, for example. And in my private life, it's been also quite a bit of a roller coaster. Last year, I was in a very tumultuous relationship, and I got to relearn some lessons that I thought I knew. And yeah, I got a repeater on those, and got to do some very basic ground level work as well to deal with the messiness of what is it like to get PTSD symptoms because you've experienced some significant trauma. Which now looking back at it almost a year later, and also just coming back from a facilitator retreat for the specific type of trauma therapy that I ended up doing, it's very clear how that has expanded my capacity to now hold space for people who have had similar experiences, because before I wouldn't necessarily have been able to hold space for that. And as both a teacher who talks about well-being and resilience a lot in my academic work and in my yoga teacher work, that is really important because people like to come to me and tell me what's wrong.
I love this. There's so much. And thank you for your candor and jumping right in. So already hitting some themes that I sense we were going to unpack today, and we're getting right into it, seeing as how you're a returning guest. I love this. I think you even used the word bridge, going into these new spaces I never thought I would before. And I know today you're going to do something you never thought you would do before, which is sing on camera, which came out when we were kind of inspired to create today's episode. And there's definitely stuff that I've been having in my own way since we recorded the last episode on the second season of going into these new spaces. And I've been seeing more and more of the leaders I work with or leaders that I connect with, like yourself, being a bridge, right? This new way of leadership is connecting two worlds. And it seems like more and more you have the confidence, which even Harvard Business Review and all these scientific studies tell us that confidence is more important than competence, believe it or not. Not that you shouldn't have competence. I know us engineers love the precision. So I love that you're actually embodying this and bringing the bridging of well-being in tech. And that is going to be something that we're going to unpack today, because you even hit another nail on the head, this concept of the foundational, you didn't say this word, leadership development work. Because I know in the work that you do with engineers and technicians, they're eager to do AI and all sorts of other programs and codecs and all this. And something that I want to flush out today, and I know we're going to do it in the breath work we're going to lead up to in the demonstration that you're going to guide us through, is the foundational human technologies, right? We're all eager to now add on an appendage of AI and chat GPT and all this. And I love what you said. You said, Haas, I had to go back to the basics. And I even had to do that in the last 2 years, being as masterful as I've been. So what did that look like? And I don't mean in terms of the story or the narrative or the personal experiences. If you could break down some of, let's say, what didn't you know you hadn't done and you had glossed over, let's say an initiation or foundational level of work. What were the kind of things of the flavor or the buckets, let's say, of things that you had to revisit and be like, oh, shoot, I need to refine this foundation more on the human level?
The most important repeater lesson for me was setting healthy boundaries. And that setting healthy boundaries serves both sides. So I got very invested in helping someone who had the best intentions and who wasn't capable on following through with what he had at that time. And I did not set healthy boundaries in time and follow through with actions that would show that those boundaries matter, and otherwise I have to step away. That was
This
a hard
happens a
lesson to
lot.
revisit.
This happens a lot,
Yeah.
even in outside of relational dynamics. Because as you said that, here's what analogy dropped in. I didn't code myself. I did know at the university I went to, San Diego, there were a lot of coders, a lot of programmers, and the CSC lab, and I knew the lifestyle. What I'm almost reminded of is, whether it be relationships as you're unpacking this, the boundaries, I want to talk on boundaries, because what I'm hearing is also we need boundaries with our passion projects, right? Because I knew a lot of coders that they would lose themselves. They would lose their health. And so boundaries is an interesting word. We can have it, as you're alluding to, in your personal life and your relational life. It's coming through. So what do you mean by boundaries? Because I want to play with this a little bit. What do you mean by boundaries? Like, how did that lesson come into you? And because that word for me is I'd say a very tricky human word, boundaries, and different coaches and leaders have different, rules and teaching. So what did you learn, and how have you embodied boundaries? Talk to us about that. Let's unpack boundaries.
Yeah, my heart is beating fairly quick now because that lesson is a very generic one that, as you say, applies on a million levels. And for me, it came through maybe on the most physical and basic version as it can in terms of domestic violence. And when there were repeat occurrences of that, to realize at some point the fact that he says with all his best intentions, it's never going to happen again, doesn't mean that that's going to be true.
We lose
And I
ourselves.
have to draw the consequences from that, no matter how much I care.
Yeah. It's hard to catch ourselves and say, because I've been in those positions before. I've been the aggressor and I've lost myself in the passion. And that's been on a personal side. Let's say for boundaries on a relational side, I've had to learn what you're speaking to is that I have to gut check myself. I have to be realistic with myself because I can get carried away. And then I may be a repeat offender, or in your instance, as the woman, you may have been the repeat, victim, let's say, because you kept forgiving. So how do you curb your emotions now? How do you curb is maybe the wrong word, because when I hear boundaries, talk to me about this. How does this land? It's like a container. Is that your interpretation of it
Yes.
energetically?
Well, it is kind of providing a safe container for myself. So if we speak about it on energetic levels of masculine and feminine energy, which we can have in a relationship dynamic where one partner embodies more than the other, than the one, and within ourselves we also have both of those, which means that my internal masculine energy gets to set the constraint, the container for where it is safe for me to flow in my femininity and to allow myself to fall into that passion with a partner, and to say, okay, I love you, and this is the boundary where I have to draw a consequence in order to keep myself safe. So that was the specific example.
This is
And it
beautiful.
applies on emotional levels as well. It applies in conversations, it applies in work commitments, it applies across all areas of our life.
Well, let me this is interesting how this is coming out in this way, because this now, getting into the work that you said, I never thought I would get into this space of equity. And the big buzzword now in the corporate culture leadership development space is psychological safety. And I see something really magical in what you're bringing out that I would say is not conventional. It's almost like a out of left field it matches with what my philosophy is. So let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. It's almost like you learned psychological safety for yourself so you could contain yourself. So it's learning, what do I need? What are the containments I need so I feel safe, so I can do what I need to do moving forward? Is that a good encapsulation? Did that?
I would say. And it was so interesting and incredibly frustrating at the same time, because I thought I had learned that lesson and I knew.
Thought, right? We both thought. That's the whole engineer thing that we're going to unpack more today. Is a lot of us engineer types, we think a lot and we meta think. We have a layer, literally a veil of thought on the reality construct that's not the real reality. It's an interpretive perspective or interpretive lens. So you seem to be telling us that you developed psychological safety yourself. You didn't wait for somebody to give it to you. Is that accurate?
Nobody else can give it to us.
Talk to us, Goose. What do you mean by that? That's a spicy meatball. Talk to me about that some more. Okay, if you feel inspired, elaborate on that. Nobody can give that to us. I agree. Tell us what you mean by that. I want your perspective on it. Yeah.
I believe it is very close to the concept of self-love. So nobody else can fill that big bucket that I hold for me desiring love other than myself, because the closest relationship I can ever have, and the one that it truly boils down to, is the relationship to myself, me, my soul, me, my higher self, whatever word you want to choose, me and the person in the mirror. Because we get to hang out 24/7, 365 days a year, which means if I don't do my very, very best to take super good care of me, how could I possibly be a safe space for anybody else who I'm in a relationship with? And so being a safe space for myself is the foundation for me being in healthy relationship with other people.
Now you had done this work because this such as upon the first episode, which I may have said when we hit record that I kind of went back to look at and kind of skim through to kind of refresh my memory since it's been so long and so much has transpired in my life as well. And it sounds like to me on the first episode you talked about this, right? I mean, so in a
Mhm.
way, it sounds like many of us, right? We do the work, we think we've arrived, and then it sounds like you're like, holy cow, it's the proverbial waking up from school. You know, mommy and daddy pull the cover, and you're like, wait, what? There's more to do around this. And I love it. You're touching on a very, very important thing that has been my panacea, my medicine, self-love.
Mhm.
And the subtle ways that we can trick ourselves into thinking we even self-love. Because I would say on the first episode you were on, second season, that's what you talked about. You're like how your journey, you couldn't look at yourself in the mirror and all this. So you had done that work. So it sounds like you went deeper.
Oh yeah. It's a different level, I want to almost say. Like we get to repeat these lessons, not in the sense of, oh, I forgot everything about it. It's we integrate and then we learn, oh, there's another level to this. Because looking back now, I also have a big appetite for adventure. I'm a Cancer rising, which means I am here to feel a ton. Like
Mm,
this is what I came for.
mm,
Not to hang out in the bliss cloud permanently, because well, that's not what we do while we're here on Earth in a physical 3D version. Like we come here to have all the experiences, and my Capricorn moon makes sure that I do bring that sense of adventure. And then the Virgo is all over the place because she's like, wait, where's the structure? We're supposed to be in control. So this is
mm,
where me learning to deal with the messiness comes in, and all of that.
mm.
When I say repeater lesson, I realized sometimes that that may even be a frustrating term in terms of, oh, I haven't learned it. It's not that. I think it's repeating that lesson on the next level.
I
And
think
that's
Ken
okay.
Wilber, yeah, Ken Wilber called it spiral dynamics, right? And then I think
Yes,
with David
exactly.
Hawkins and the work on consciousness that he did as an MD PhD is we start to see as humans that everything is vibratory that you and I have talked about before. And so what, yeah, I hear you. It's like similar to me. I've had to learn, oh no, because you know, if you're an engineer, if you're a type A, like you and I used to be, you're like, oh, I'm messing up again. And can it lead to a downward spiral? Oh no, why am I revisiting this? And so I love how you're touching on this because you come at it from a higher consciousness level to integrate a finer aspect of it, is how I hear
Mhm.
you saying it.
Yes. And one,
Hmm,
if I can pick up
yeah,
on one
yeah,
reference
talk to
that
me,
you
Goose.
just
Yeah,
made,
yeah.
the Ken Wilber book. So
Hmm.
Ken Wilber, who he has inspired me a lot
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, so I hit a nail on that.
by one particular thing that he did really well, and that was looking at spiritual experience reports in relation to other types of science and saying,
Hmm,
here is where spirituality comes in, and talks a lot about first person experience reports,
hmm,
which is a valid scientific method.
hmm,
And here's how we look at it in other disciplines where we observe more from the outside. So, observing from the outside, observing from the inside. So, while I may not agree with all of his work, the one thing that I took away that I found extremely helpful is this translation thing of, this is how you do it on one side, this is how you do it in traditional sciences and scientific methods that we use now, and they're actually not so different, and maybe there is some validity to these things over here at all as well, and maybe we can integrate them, therefore the insights from both. And that's what we've seen in the science of the last decade,
hmm,
namely, oh, that woo-woo aura that people used to talk about, that
hmm,
some scientists raise their eyebrows at.
hmm.
Now the quantum physicists, we call it the biofield, and we can measure it. And I have a camera device over here that takes your fingerprint and that will show it to you.
Oh, you got one of those? Or you ended up getting one? Oh, that's cool. So it's interesting, right? Because I hear we talked about this the first time, this notion, and we're carrying it forward more of sustainability and then looking at things from a systems thinking and a holistic, right? Because earlier you said the feminine and the masculine. Something that I really want to unpack today, because as an engineer, I learned, and you even said it, I came here to feel, right? I'll add an addendum to that, not only think, right? And you're already unpacking so much synchronistically because you spoke about the masculine and the feminine in harmony, right? Having those two polarizations within us are aspects of our whole self. today I feel we're going to really get into the heart and mind and the way we split those two. And I know for me as a recovering engineer, that was something important that I realized, oh, and this is where we're already getting into something that I was like, ooh, let's go here. And you're already kind of unpacking it through the lens of how for you, your brain, your analytical brain, almost what I'm hearing as an interpretation, my interpretation is it needed Ken Wilber to say that for me to have that permission slip, because we can try to analyze everything. We can try to actually, the computer brain can go, okay, I need to try to make sense of all of this. If it does not compute, then I can't accept it. And I can't accept it.
It was less of a permission slip, more of a, here's the method of how to do it. Here's how you can start with that translation. That helped.
Well, talk to me about that. Why did it help? Was it because it was scary to go where you'd never been before and the engineer was freaking out? Because that was for me. For me, it was like I needed a formula, right? Paint by numbers. That's what all these early teachers did. It's almost like they helped my over lopsided left hemisphere orientation by giving me different ways of doing. And then now I'm like, free flying, like any master. It's like, okay, you kind of improvise and it's more of an art than a science, or both. Is that been your interpretation or your experience? How do you relate to that?
It was mostly one specific piece of verbiage, and that was when we hear about spiritual experiences, those are first-person observations, those are internal observations, and then comparing that to other scientific observation methods. And that kind of made it click. Like, I can follow that. And then I kept building on how do I translate. And now for the breath work that we'll get into later, it's the same thing. There is a description from the spiritual side. I can explain that whole thing using spiritual energetic terms, and I can use
science,
biophysics to explain,
which we're going to get into, heart rate variability, polyvagal tone, all this funny stuff that we didn't touch upon, because if you're new to us or you saw this episode with Birgit, or you're joining because you know Birgit and you haven't really been a follower of the show, this season is all about experiential. So yes, so as you alluded to, if you're new to us, we're going to actually do some demonstrative experiential stuff towards the end of today. So this is interesting. Let's go a little bit deeper into this, because how does this relate to your creative flow, your genius, let's say your ability to improvise? Did this give, in terms of that permission slip concept and this notion of your evolution as a leader? Because it seems like the last 2 years you've gone into more feeling, which I would say is more heart, less mind, the more down here. So what have you noticed in terms of, let's say, when we first met, right? And the work we did together, it's like, what have you noticed in terms of these topics of creative genius, flow, and inspiration, in terms of this caveat overarching all this, painting outside the lines, which us scientists, which is what you talked about. I need the first episode validation, or I need some cross-reference, or I need an example, etc., so I can stay within the lines, right? Precision.
2 things come to mind. Yeah. The first piece is to trust the flow of energy. And if, for example, like on a very where the rubber meets the road level, that means if I'm trying to write a specific report for something and I am incredibly stuck and starting to fry my brain over it, to be okay with putting that aside, do something else that will elevate my energy, and trust that I will come back to the thing and do it, because I do care about my commitments. So I definitely will write that report. The question is, am I going to flagellate myself through it, or am I going to allow myself to go for a walk for an hour so I can actually have the energy back to do it? And the second piece is to trust my intuition no matter what, and to not feel the necessity to make up a rationale for it. So also, very concrete example, I got an invitation to do something. I get many offers for work, and I know I only have a limited amount of time and capacity in 3D in a given work week to do things. And so I listen to the sense of my intuition, and I will tell them, this doesn't sit right. And honestly, I don't even know why right now. It seems like it's not the right fit. I may not know, and it's okay. And I can still act on that sense of intuition. And that is something that I very deliberately practiced. And I did have to work up the courage. I did. I did get to practice to work up the courage. Let me rephrase that, to own that. It
You're
would be easy to
speaking,
make up
okay, I get
rationals.
the parlance, right? So let's say I'm a new engineer listening to this, right? You're speaking to a non-tangible, non-material, trust the flow of energy, you say? Huh? Intuition, you say? Non-intellect? That must have been really, and you hit the nail on the head again. That's par for the course for your Virgo precision. Courage. Because yeah, it takes some courage to trust what I'm calling the mystery now. As I've embraced my mystic, it dropped in, oh, a mystic. I wasn't much of a mystic before because I didn't actually embody the mystery. I use mentalizing, which is what you're speaking to, is I used to make a rationalization for everything. I call that mentalizing, is applying the mental to everything. And then that interpretation becomes your reality construct. And then that's it. That's your schemata. And you're kind of like, I don't know why I'm like this. And it's like, well, because you've chosen to be. So talk to me about the courage. What did the courage look like? You talked a lot about this the first episode. I want to hear the last 2 years. What have been some, that's pardon my French and not PG, what have been the ballsy moves you've made courageously in an academic setting? Can you give us some examples to inspire those that are watching that it is possible? Because I know wearing the love button into court the first time and talking about dispute resolution in front of a judge with a high stakes multi-million dollar business litigation, it took a lot of balls. You know, I was scared. I was sweating more than usual. I usually sweat because I'm kinetic. So I'm giving an example to you and the audience of what it looks like as a former lawyer to do that in a light way. So I can only imagine it was even scarier to go into academia. So what were some things that pop up, if you've had any, because you did say you've had some opportunities. So I sense there may be some good examples of holy shit balls, pardon my French audience, that, you know, am I really doing this? I get the sense that was the feeling. Yeah. It's like, am I really going to say this or do this? So what was that like? Can you give the audience a flavor of that?
One example is to explain that piece of following my intuition to an academic audience
How do you do that?
and to say,
You know, talk to us. How do you do that? How do you unpack it to
uh-huh,
them? Yeah.
and to say, when you have a knowing inside of you, it's not the chatty voices in your head. So the first piece was, let's talk about the voices in our heads, which is, we all have them. You may say they are not there, and even one of my most engineering connections who I really care about, he said to me at some point, yeah, that voice, if I had to put a face on it, it looks like a grumpy lemon.
A grumpy lemon. Oh, I
Yeah,
love
that would
that. The
be
grumpy
that
lemon
would
mental voice. Keep going. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love that. I love that picture because it's such a beautiful visualization for the inner critic. So there are several voices. There is like
That's a good
the
one.
inner critic. There could also be the hedonist. It's like, throw this out of the window. We're going to go party. So
Which is
we all have
boundaries. Goes back. Keep going. That goes
exactly.
back to
Yeah.
boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have several voices. And the first piece was, don't believe everything those voices say. So we are not our thoughts in more meditation teacher speak. That was the first piece. And then the second piece is, now how do I differentiate what my voice of intuition
Yeah.
is? And that's where one gets to speak about the clairs. So we have different ways of how that can drop in. For some of us, it's we see a picture. For some of us, is we hear something. For some of us, is we have a felt sense in the body. And for me, it's both pictures and sometimes hearing very clear words. And the one thing how I know it is the voice of my intuition, as opposed to one of the chatty voices in my head that is very opinionated, is it comes without an emotional charge and it's silent. It is a very calm, quiet, kind voice.
Neutral.
Yeah. And owning that in front of a scientific audience, that was scary for the first time. I guess it's good to also have some degrees in other areas. So me being a 500 level yoga teacher makes me more credible, also like an embodied mindfulness coach. And, you get your list of certificates to show people who have been educated that way and are very much still thinking that way, to show I did my homework over here.
I love this.
So whether you like what I say or not, there is a foundation that I'm building this upon, also in how you may see the educational world. So that has helped.
It's interesting because you touch on extrasensory pathways, which is going to be on Jeffrey Eisen's on this episode or this season, and he's a fellow Inside Timer teacher like us, and we have a lot of that this season, unpacking our creative genius and these extrasensory gifts. And as you said earlier, scientists are only catching up with what these ancient, let's say, mystics or ancient masters or ancient teachings used to say. It's a convergence is happening where we're learning that there are two sides to a truth. One was, let's say, a right hemisphere lens, a more esoteric lens, and the other was a more scientific or material lens that speak to both halves of a truth. And it's interesting because your process matches my process and what I see in clients, which is when you let go of the modus operandi, the tool you've used the most, right? The intellect, and you are never taught these foundational things that we're touching upon. We're starting to broach more and more now of these foundational, let's call them human technologies, right? These base ways we're wired. You don't even learn. You have an intuitive center, which now science is we talked about this in the first episode together. And then we have an instinct center, right? In the gut. So it's interesting that you're unpacking that it's also like practice is required, as you are highlighting or alluding to, because it's like, okay, wait, what is this voice? So thank you for also bringing out some, let's say, subjective aspects that I don't think are as subjective once we all start to hear them, because I would say there's a universality to the intuitive, let's say, knowing. It's neutral.
I would agree.
It's not a woulda, shoulda. It's not a command. The mind commands, like the grumpy lemon, which is not only the mind, it's an aspect of the mind or a sub-personality.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love how you're unpacking that, because in academia, in technical speak, it's not an area we can see and sense. And so it's like, oh, this is scary. How did you do it? So I love how you're already showing some of the proverbial ropes. And I know in other episodes, we've unpacked that with other guests as well. So what else? Do you have any other, like, are there any times, let me flip this on its head. For those that are in the audience, maybe listening now, new, or maybe a returning audience member that are like, no way, that worked there, that'll never work here. Let me do the proverbial devil's advocate. Did you run into any moments of, holy cow, this ain't gonna work? They're like, dissonant. No, I don't believe you. That's BS. That's foofy. Even with all of the, and I love how you brought it up, I'm envisioning a society we don't need all these fancy degrees. People will see the competence and they'll go, okay, I believe you because you can show the impact. The results speak for themselves. Now, with all of your fancy degrees and certifications and your ability to speak holistically, whether it be this lens or that lens, did you run into any worst case scenarios, let's call it, of resistance, that even with your courage? And what did that look like? How did you deal with that?
Two examples come to mind. So the first example is the most frequent critique I currently get for my academic work, because I am still a professor for software engineering, is the question, how exactly is well-being and resilience different for software engineers than for other people? And how does that show up in their daily work tasks?
You get that? Wow, keep going.
Yeah. So I get to reflect on what are
They're all humans. Anyways, keep going. I know it's...
Well, they understand the commonalities, and then they say to me, well, why don't you go publish this in the Journal of Occupational Health or in some psychology stuff? And I'm like, because the software engineering people need to hear that.
Correct.
And they need to hear it from me, because they're only going to believe somebody who comes from their strong background.
Are they even going to seek out an occupational or technically you're talking about go to what is it? International Coaching Federation kind of a topic. Yeah. So anyway, so I get that. What is to say? I'm shocked, because I'm like, really? They said that to you? As the audience can tell from my response.
Yeah. And then the second piece is for people who are maybe still a bit disconnected from themselves. So who are very left brain educated and simply haven't even tried to access that giant other part of themselves. And so when I speak about those things to them, it sounds absolutely foreign and like rainbow colored unicorns flying around, and me saying I can see them, and it's not their experience, and therefore they can't relate to it. And so one of the many bridges that I've built here that has helped me tremendously as a tool is to say, pay attention how you use language in your everyday. And both me being brought up as German, I've noticed that in German, we tend to say, I have to a lot. We do that a lot. And in academia, we talk very much about, oh, I have to do all these things and I have this giant long list of tasks. And then I say to them, look, you do have a choice. You always have a choice. And maybe you don't like the consequences of some of the options. Maybe you don't like the consequences of any of the options you're currently facing, which means, therefore, it feels like you don't have a choice. And when you say, I am choosing to do this uncomfortable thing out of the 3 uncomfortable options, then you're making a choice and you're going to feel a lot better about it. And if you manage to catch yourself while you say it, then you're going to notice how much you shift in how you feel about your experience. And that's kind of a first hint of what I'm talking about. And it's something that they will strongly experience, even if they're not that strongly connected, like that sense of empowerment. If I say I choose over I have to.
It's interesting. You said the word disconnected. I use the word disassociated. And I would say that in the technical industries, more than most, they have and then you said they're not connected to a greater part of themselves, right? So I would call that the soul. That's one of my missions, right? Is to bring, whether you agree there is a soul or this energetic aspect of us. We have an extraordinary body and a physical body, right? So I love how you're saying that, because it's beautiful, because this is an aspect that this is one of the points that I have the show, right? This show is an extension of my mission, because it's for the naysayers. The show isn't for the receptive one. You too, all those people as well, because I would say that's why as a collective, that's why as a tech industry, we don't have sustainability as much as we would like. That's why we don't have happy engineers as much as we would like, fulfilled engineers as much as we would like, because I would say, like you and I on our own individual journeys, we were disconnected, we were disassociated, and we were out of touch. So it's almost like funny to me, because as I hear you talking, it's almost like you're talking to a bunch of coders, saying to them, well, you code, and if you have garbage code, then you're going to get garbage output. And so you're talking about German code, right? Cultural code, and how we develop all this codex called the schemata that psychologists call it. And so then it's funny to me that even coders would be like, really? I have a choice as to the code that I use in my own software and consciousness? Well, yeah. So I love that. So you're almost like giving them the access to their sovereignty. And it's very Viktor Frankl-esque, because you allow them to get closer to that greater part of themselves by almost like folding their consciousness upon itself.
I
What
love
happened?
how you just connected that to coding.
Well,
So
I am an engineer.
I have
Yeah.
not drawn that parallel before, to say, to use that as a metaphor of saying,
Well,
you are coding yourself here.
It's
Like, it's a
almost like
perfect
I do.
metaphor.
It's
I'm gonna
almost
start
like I
using
do
that.
know what I'm doing. And it is like I have taught you before in the higher realms and dimensions. And that's why your soul knew me. So for those that are engineers, let's put this in engineering speak, since your almighty leader and Grand Poobah loves it so much. People, yeah. I mean, there's a great coder, and then we're mini coders. So then if we tap into and mod into the ultimate coder, which is what you said, we have a greater. Now let's reel this in. Let's break it back down to 10,000 feet for those that are like, holy cow, he ascended us to 50,000 feet so quickly. So let's talk about this for a second, because this is the theme for me, this episode, this notion of, or a sub theme. I used to be an engineer or a recovering humanist. For me, that means I had lost touch with myself. I had disconnected, I disassociated. And I know we've talked about that on the first episode. What else do you do with that type of an audience? So if they're listening now, which I sense some people in the audience may be of that kilt, which is fine. Wherever you're at in your journey, we honor you. What else do you do? Let's say maybe they're not experiences. What other tools do you have in your toolbox for the engineers that are so disconnected from their own power and sovereignty that they can code themselves, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Again, 2 examples come to mind. I seem to be very on the number 2 today. There is a piece around joy and playfulness that I bring into my everyday work experience, both with the students as well as with my local colleagues, as well as with the researchers around the world that I collaborate with, which means I set a fun tone in an email. Most of my emails start with, hey, first name, happy whatever day of the week it is, or sending you a ray of sunshine since Gothenburg is really foggy and rainy today, or whatever it may be. Like to set a tone and to have a bit of a connection piece, which is absolutely independent of the type of technical work that we do. It's more a sense of we live in this more and more digitized work world in the area of work that I am in. And how can I bring the human connection back into that? And for me, it works a lot with joy and playfulness. And to the point where last week I had my out of office email on because I went to this trauma retreat, to this trauma seminar on, we're going to teach you to be a facilitator in this particular type of trauma therapy. I arrived there. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's an old, ancient, 1,000 years of silent meditation monastery where the last monks had been living until 1927. And now we get to hold that seminar there. The grounds were steeped in the most
That's
beautiful
good energy. Yeah. Sounds
energy.
like good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the day before I arrive, or a couple of days before we arrive, there's a huge oak tree that falls down and we're cut off internet for the entire week. So I put out my office out of office email saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to respond to your email after walking 20 minutes to get cell phone reception to say, I am very much out of office. I'm also cut off from the internet this week. And I came back, and today at lunch, a colleague of mine said, oh, I really liked your out of office email joke. And I'm like,
wasn't a
that
joke.
For once was not a joke.
Yeah, wasn't a joke.
It's the real circumstance.
Wow.
And it and
so you shake them out of apathy, it sounds like. There's joy, playful. I want to unpack that some more. So keep going. For this first point, it sounds like with that tonality, you said the word tone, you're shaking them out of apathy. You're almost like, wait, what? I can joke, I can play. I love that. I would do that when I was full-time in law too. Keep going. Yeah. So you were saying,
yes,
I love that. Yeah.
It has it has several beautiful effects. One effect is people kind of wake up and be like, oh, I got a nice email, or I got an email that started with a fun line. So
this is my analogy. What? Oh, yes. Oh, program broken. Oh, I am human. What is going on? That's kind of what I sense happens to them in a funny.
You're exaggerating.
I know. I'm being sarcastic. Par for the course for my Sagittarius.
I love the people that I work with, and they're not quite as disconnected. What it is instead of being like, yet another one of my 100 emails that I have to answer today, be like, oh, hi.
Wrote works though. Yeah.
Second piece, and this is where it is a mutual benefit. I have their attention now. So with people that we feel disconnected with, well, no, I have their attention now. So they're actually going to read what I sent instead of skimming and being like, well, roughly that. Third piece is we're building a relationship. They're probably going to respond in a genuine way. It doesn't have to be funny. It doesn't matter. Even if it says, have a great rest of your day at the end of the email, and I know that that's not what they usually write, then I know, oh, something happened there. So we build relationships, and I probably get the request met or get told, look, I can't do this one, but here is a person that may be able to help you, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of human connection in this that has tended to get a bit lost or underappreciated as we have been digitizing our work more and more.
Well, it's like a soul-sucking spiral is how I see it, right? Whether we be all head engineer-oriented, or whether it be a matter of the work culture where it's devoid of joy and play, and it's all, let's say, a serious tone. And then, and it has trickle-down effects that I'm touching on. This creative genius gets dimmed. So I would generalize it as it's soul-sucking over time. You become devoid of humanity. You even said the words relationship, connection, heart. So a lot of this is almost, it sounds like what you're doing is with this next generation of engineers, is you're making them conscious and more self-aware.
Yes. And another piece that I thought about when we speak about the have-tos and all these tasks is I also teach my students a lot of managing from below. So I tell them, look, a management relationship means you have a supervisor and you have a person who carries out a piece of work. The moment I am your supervisor, say a master thesis supervisor or a bachelor thesis supervisor, you get to manage me from below because I'm supervising quite a few people, and here's where I get to own my messiness. Sometimes I lose track of something. So like, Please remind me of things to do. I know that I care about being your supervisor. So if I fail to respond in a timely manner, and we agree on the number of days of what that means, please do feel confident to send me a reminder. You're not bugging me. You're helping me do my work in the way that I care about doing it. So that
That's
again makes them
very
feel quite
vulnerable of you.
empowered.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable of you. And you're leading, you're not managing.
Yeah.
I would say our conscious leadership, there's a lot of better colleagues out there in the ICE, the International Coaching Federation, all these other places that, I would say that's like par for the course conscious leadership work. So I'm proud of you for bringing that. Let me ask you a question before we kind of move on, since you said joy and play. What role personally, I'm not talking about from people you've interacted with or you've taught, personally, and this can go even beyond the last 2 years, in your journey as a whole, what role have you learned as an engineer in your work does joy and play have? Because I personally was like, no, I didn't have an inner child. I mean, this personally about me having worked with me and being a colleague. So, and people on the show have heard it over the last 4 years about my journey. So I literally didn't have joy and play in my life, let alone know that there was a role for joy and play in work, and that our work could be play, which is more and more what I'm doing and what you're doing. So what was that journey like for you? Because I sense the audience and the people you teach are similar to us, right? So what was your journey like with that? At what point did you learn there was a role, and how did it benefit you to bring joy and play? And if you want to add the dirty word passion that we've been talking about behind the scenes.
I would say I learned what a huge role it plays after my burnout in 2009, because until then, I was a very diligent worker in that field, realizing that it is not necessarily that much of my passion. So the first piece I got to ask myself is, wait, if it's not, why am I doing this? Why am I pouring all my energy in this? So it helped me start reorienting towards the topics that I more care about and that I have invested myself thoroughly in over the last, by now, next year is going to be 15 years. And it has also shown me, not only make joy and playfulness life more worth living and experiencing, it's also maybe the safest bet against burning out. So for me, that has become a really good indicator flag. When I realize I am not playful or joyous in my work anymore, and that over, say, a couple of days or a week, because sometimes, it's all right. We all go through waves. If that hasn't been the time for a few days, then I know, oh, okay, something here to shift. Something is trying to get my attention. I'm falling back into old workhorse mode that I know I tend to run myself into the ground with. So I may still want to pour all that energy in. The question is, can I pour all that energy in on a higher level, on a different vibration, so that I actually experience joy while doing it? And if not, what do I need to step away to do in order to get back to that good place?
I'm not a burnout expert. I do burnout in my work. So I don't know if this is hardwired as a rule of thumb. I don't believe I've come across a lot of burnout experts, quote unquote, ever heard the litmus test for avoiding burnout being how much joy and play am I having in my life? I freaking think that's brilliant, because that's in hindsight, if I were to and you did it in your own experience, I would say it matches mine. It's like, if I were to go back to let's call it old Haas, pre-burnout Haas, and say, hey, you're right. It's like, and it speaks to boundaries, getting carried away in the work, right? Losing boundaries with work, because it's, do I have play and joy right now? If not, I may need to modulate something here and bring more of that. Maybe take a step away, as you said, maybe make more time, prioritize, as you alluded to, and it's different things. And I love how you touched on it's cyclical. Yeah, we're all cyclical. Talk to me about passion, then, the dirty word, right? That the word that I find a lot of my work with people is activating their fire, their passion of what is that? And because you struck me as I know that's your nature, your Germanic, your nurture as well. I would say that you have a passion that's increased, and I've seen that in you, in the way you show up and your vivaciousness, let's say, in terms of your emotional relays and stuff like that. Not that you weren't before, I'm saying the amplitude. Would you relate to that? Does that resonate? How do you relate to that statement? What does the last 2-3 years look like in terms of amplitude of passion in that word? Because I think engineer and technical work tends to be passionless. And that's one of the things I sense we're here to ignite and inspire people with, which, your job doesn't have to be boring or doesn't have to be passionless, even if it's coding.
None of it has to be passionless.
Beautiful.
So I'm not sure why passion is a dirty word in your in your experience. For me, it is.
Go
it
to
is like
lawyers. It's a dirty word. It's a dirty word in some industries. Yeah.
Don't need a lawyer right now. Hope not anytime soon. We're good. So I love the passion piece because it's the juice of life. If I am not passionate about something, what am I here for? Like, I'm not here to be a vegetable. And I realized at some parts in my waves, when I was very much on the detachment from everything, when I took the aparigraha, the non-gripping from the Ayurvedic scriptures, to being very disconnected from everything.
Surrender. Yeah.
Then I also started to experience kind of a flat line. I'm like, yes, this is nice. Everything is beautiful. And there was not as much passion in it. So now I've learned that I get to be really passionate about all the things, and I get to not grip so hard onto an expected outcome. So again, can I be passionate about everything that I do and about every step of the way without being so worried about whether it's going to lead to the outcome that I am desiring or not? Can I enjoy the process? Can I be in the moment? Can I be in that feeling state of I'm already where I am wanting to go right now? And what that has looked like personally, especially in my academic and research life, since that is the part where it used to be a bit more disconnected, is I now really own that passion. And I will speak about it. I will speak about it to the research audiences, and I will speak about that in front of my students as well as in front of the colleagues and my managers. I tell them, look, if we're not passionate about what we're doing, what are we doing here?
Would you say that's par for the course in your industry? That they're passionate, your industry is full of passionate people?
There are people who are very fired up about everything they do. And then there are people who say, this is my breadwinning job. It's like, it's
what would you say?
fine.
The Venn diagram, if you were to put I know it's slightly arbitrary, if you were to put a quant to it, what would you say is the Venn diagram of passionate engineers? The stats. I know it's slightly subjective because you're not, you don't have a data set. It's off your hunch, off of the sample size of people you've interacted with, and you've traveled the world, you speak in different, audiences and conferences, etc. Right? That's where I came from. It's a dirty word because I would say the industry I came from, law and dispute resolution. I'll speak from the sample size of my experience. I'm not saying this is objectively true. Obviously, it's subjective data. I would say it's what you said, the latter, which is it's a job, and I have my passions over here. And passion, as the Greek said, is the passing of ions. It is the flow of energy. The bioelectromagnetic energy is not curtailed, is not constricted. We are being moved and we are moving. There's higher impact, higher performance, higher fulfillment. That's where all this flow coach stuff is going these days, right? With positive psychology. So I'm more like, it's really simple. I'm curious. So what's your data read on it? Do you feel like the predominance of your industry is passionate, or is it lacking?
Maybe it's 25%. And I would add a few more percent on that when we talk about driven. I'm not sure if driven and passionate always come together.
Well, that goes to boundaries.
Yeah. Plenty of people who may be driven within a certain set of constraints to say, I want to be successful in my career, then that percentage is going to be higher. And if we say passionate leaders, and that doesn't mean you have to have a management title on your business card, then the percentage is probably a bit lower.
Well, I would say driven is obsessive. I would say, or maybe not even that's not the right word. It's like where is the source of energy coming from, which we're going to get into in a second. So this is for me a fascinating topic, and I'll kind of unpack it with this. I've come to learn that everything I create is an extension of me, right? So I think we touched on this in the first episode we were together, this notion of like, right, you're creating a program. It's an extension of you. It's only as good as the coder, right? So if I'm passionate versus I'm driven and I create a technology, it will have a different resonance. It will look different. It will have a different vibration. And my hunch as a practitioner, as an organizational development practitioner, is that that will fizzle out, will be problematic, won't be sustainable, to use your verbiage. Something will happen with the software, the technology. So that's my response. I know you didn't ask for it. Is this, where's the fine line between driven? I see passion as more organic versus driven as more man-made or material. There's a let's say almost like a greater source for the passion. It's flowing through a soul's calling, higher self. You used that word earlier. Versus driven is, like you even said it, managerial title, success, Maya, material gain. I don't know. How does that land for you?
I can see your perspective on it. I would have chosen slightly different words. I would
What
have
words would you use?
associated, or I associate the passionate part with having the feeling in it, like being in it, invested also emotionally. And I see the driven, ambitious version as being more left brain fueled.
I like that. I'll add one more. Let's add one more, because as you said that, this also came through what you talked about with boundaries. We have self boundaries. We don't let our drive take us over. So I would say a passionate person that's, for a lack of a better description, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like they have the psychological safety within them. So they're not overcompensating. The drive isn't coming from, no, am I going off course? I'm going this way. All right, let's digress.
I have a sense that we could run over those boundaries both with driven and with
With
passionate,
passion.
because we can burn ourselves out having all our feelings invested, and we can burn ourselves out operating only on rationale.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll agree with that because that resonates. And you're right. And I would say from my own personal experience that yes, my passion also wasn't always driven. It was sometimes selfless, like, whoa, I really want to play, and it burned me out. So I would agree with you from my personal experience. All right, I like that. I think this is a good segue to do what you thought you would never be doing, which is singing a song. Because you touched on this earlier, and I know when we prepared for this episode, I wrote this in my notes to kind of to remind me this. There is more juiciness. I think you said something to this effect when we spoke, when we were catching up, to say, hey, it resonates to come back and do another episode together. There is more juiciness of life to taste, feel, and experience. And then I personally, I had to learn not to numb myself, right? Or we talked about disconnecting. So when we reconnected, you said, Haas, I wrote a song, and I said, well, I want you to sing this song on the air. And you're like, oh. And then I was like, I can't believe I'm going to have somebody sing on the air, because even old Haas would have been like, this is a serious show, and what is this going to contribute to our audience? And instead of seeing the value in the play and the joy of you being able to share some of your passion and light and inspiration. So if it resonates, the audience are going to do something new that we've never done. We're going to take a little, let's say, intermission, and the intermission is going to be an impromptu little concert. Let me get my lighter. I don't have my lighter. Oh, I forgot my lighter.
Yeah, get your lighters. And in the meantime, I can tie it in with, it's actually very connected to what we talk about in this episode, because
Talk to me.
I wrote the song in my course that I taught this summer, Digitization for a Changing World, in the International Summer School for Sustainability here at Gothenburg University in Sweden. And the reason why I wrote it was I implemented a lot of storytelling techniques in this course. And for my students, the final assignment was pick a sustainability message that you personally really care about, and then tell us a story about why this matters to you. And it could be a personal account of something that had happened to them in their lives. It could be a completely fictional story. They could make a pretend documentary. They could write a poem. They could enact it. We've had comics drawn about tomatoes talking amongst each other in supermarkets. I've had a story from the perspective of an insect. I had personal accounts of things that had happened in their lives and why they mattered. I had a very socio-critical story about different educational classes and what that means when people deserve the same opportunities because of we all have equal value. And it was the most beautiful, oh, I'm getting goosebumps telling you about it. It was the most beautiful compilation of very different stories. And then one of my students said, as I explained this assignment, are you also going to write a story? Because I'd be kind of curious about your story. And then I looked over the different types that I had proposed of what they could do. And I said, you know what? I've never written a song in my life. Should I write a song? And he goes, yeah.
Wow.
So with a shaky voice on the presentation day,
Wow, I commend
I
you. You
sang the
actually
song.
employed narrative and creative. And wow, that's awesome. And real quick before you sing it,
Yes.
say where the class, because it's funny. Because again, for me as a listener, it comes out a little ironic because the title of the symposium and where the institute, it's such a serious title where something so playful got burned through. So you say it again, because for me as a listener, I was like, does not compute. Doesn't.
Yes.
Well, what?
Digitalization in a changing world within the International Summer School for Sustainability.
I mean, a little bit of
So
sustainability, those keywords. It's more of, and then at the Institute of Gothenburg, I'm kind of like, yeah,
yeah,
you
so
really
we
shook it
have
up. I like it.
Yeah, so we have students coming from all over the world to Göteborg because Göteborg is a very sustainable city measured along all the sustainable development goals, and they do really good in recycling, in public transport, and all these things. So they're a really nice example there. And then students come here and learn about it with different levels of previous knowledge about the area. And then every faculty contributes one course, and I get to teach the course for the
Wow.
IT faculty. And therefore, it's called Digitalization in a Changing World, because at the time when they had to choose the title, they had no idea who was going to teach it. And then a few months later, I got an email saying,
Guess
Birgit,
what?
Miss Sustainability, we have promised to teach a course on this matter. Can you do it? And I
We
said, of
screwed
course.
ourselves, and we need somebody to do this. And the
Yeah.
closest person is you.
And of course, digitalization means, okay, we're going to use digital media in some kind that could mean coding. Turns out I have no programmers who come for this course. They're usually not software engineers. So
Uh,
instead of developing an actual IT project, we get to employ different means. And one of them is what really connects people, storytelling. And there are so
right.
many different ways of how I can do that. Like the most bonding experiences that I've had with people is share stories while we sit around a bonfire. And maybe now that bonfire is not always going to be physical right in front of us. Maybe that's going to have the form of storytelling in different ways.
Or like on a show
And
called the Vulnerable Power Show, where leaders are spotlit to share their inner transformational journeys to inspire, encourage, and empower other leaders.
yes.
So,
So here
what
we
is
go.
this thing you never thought you would be doing?
Here it is. Another rainy Tuesday, another sleepless night. Some seagulls screaming off the roofs in grayish morning light. I wiggle my toes, I hug myself and say good morning, my love. I take a deep breath and remind myself that I am enough. Take a step out of bed, stretch my short self tall. I meditate and feel the glow, we're gonna have a ball. Let's get to play, let's seize the day, there's much fun to be found. I flow with it and allow the magic to be all around. Shine your light, shake your tail, feather, show the world your smile. Make it bright, release the tethers, you define your style. Shine your light, shake your tail, feather, show the world your smile. Make it bright, release the tethers, you define your style.
That was beautiful. And thank you for sharing. Speaking of clear gifts or extrasensory pathways, for those that are in tune and or let's say more advanced in their practices and self-awareness journey and more in tune to the subtle field, yeah, I would say that that's very moving, right? And I may not have had the awareness or I was too numb before to sense the level of emotion and the feelings that that song espoused in me, how it felt, how it landed, and the oscillations, how it resonated, let's say. So yeah, I'm proud of you. Would you have, I know we've kind of covered this, would you have ever imagined you'd be able to do something like this, or you would have been in a position to even have the passion or inspiration to do something like this?
I've always loved singing, so the singing part, natural. Doing that at university as part of a course and owning that later on, that this is kind of research and this is part of university education. And I think that is exactly the way how I want it to be and how it's supposed to be. That I did not expect.
Well, it really does bring us into this stretch of how you're teaching and what you're teaching, right? This notion of bringing this type of self-awareness and, as you said earlier, well-being to the academia world in terms of self-awareness, inner reflection, introspection, whatever words you want to use for it, and then using these tools of storytelling and narrative, and then these creative explorations, shall we say. I think that is the key, right? Because when you become left hemisphere dominant, or you become disconnected from this greater creativity or this life force, that's what we miss. We become almost like rote, mechanical, copy paste, and then the entire tech industry becomes an echo chamber of lack of innovation. And I see that as one of the issues we're all tackling is how do we tackle the new challenges humanity is facing from a new lens, so we don't recreate old problems, so to speak, right? So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's start talking about this heart-centered and organic human technology known as breath, right? Because are you bringing this? I know in the first episode, you do this time to time. Are you bringing this also in this newer style of teaching to this higher education academia world as well? Are you also bringing in more breath work? Okay, cool. So what does that look like? What is that looking like more and more as you're bringing in, like we've already touched on the creative faculties you're using, and you're bringing in more of the well-being technologies that we touched on in the first episode together? Like, what is that looking like, this evolution of it?
I don't get to teach the well-being and resilience part explicitly in all the things I do. So neither in the courses nor, say, in the keynotes that I give. For example, next week, which is going to be past by the time this episode airs, but from now, next week, I'll be giving a keynote in Istanbul, in Turkey, at the European Conference of Software Architecture. And the title of my keynote is Sustainability, Truth, Tale, or Transition, the track towards sustainability. And so it is formally very much centered around sustainability. I will certainly infuse some of these other parts that we've been speaking about. So that looks like I'm going to invite the audience to take a deep breath with me at the very start. I'm going to invite them to close their eyes for a moment if they feel psychologically comfortable to do so. To take a deep breath and really arrive here and let everything else go for the next 45 minutes. They get better retention and better learning. And that's the same what I do with my students in class. I tell them, we're going to take a 10-minute break now because we have 2 hours together. So there should definitely be a break in the middle. I invite you to stand up, get hydrated, move around a bit. And we're going to do a couple of stretches at the end of that break before we sit down again. You don't have to do that if it makes you feel uncomfortable. Here's why I would like you to do them. You're going to be more physically present in your body. You're going to retain the knowledge better. Blah, blah, blah. It also makes us be more in tune with each other. So to breathe with each other brings brain-heart coherence within ourselves and then amongst the group. So that means we're going to feel more cohesion within the group. And it's, again, this human connection piece. We co-regulate our nervous systems, if I want to explain it in biophysical terms. So it is healthy for us on a biological level to breathe with each other. It helps us bond psychologically, so it's also good for relationship building, professionally, as well as in any other ways. And whatever we do to bring ourselves into a better state of energy, the more people do that individually, the more groups do that, the more we're going to feel it as humanity in total, because maybe the biggest trouble that we're facing on this planet right now is we're under the illusion that we're all individual beings that are not connected to each other. So this illusion of separation is one of our biggest traps. And that is another piece that a few years ago would not have imagined myself saying in an academic audience. And now I do that all the time.
Well, it's like as you connect it to your wholeness within, then you can share, we're all whole. And I love that. Yeah, because I find some of the guests that come on and independent and maybe outside of the show, there are quite a few leaders around the world, depending on what industries they're in. They can't outright bring the, let's say, the new codex or this novel way of being, the sustainable way of being. So it has to be infused. I would say law is a similar one. Yeah.
Yes.
What were we going to say?
I think the most important piece that I got to learn around that, and I'm still practicing, I still get to practice that a ton more, is the exact terminology with what I do that. Because if I come with my yoga teacher vocabulary to an audience of very engineering minded professionals, they'll be like, thank you, we're out of here.
Yeah.
If I slowly transition over time into, here's the biohacking piece in your body, if you have a bunch of excited engineers who are willing to do something that helps them improve some aspect, maybe I speak about that. If I speak about leadership capabilities, then that's a way in. So this is
Knowing our
where,
audience, as they say.
yeah, we get to shape, how do I get to frame this in words that my audience is willing to receive.
So I laugh because we're going to have a new soul brother on the show this season who's a Harvard lawyer. This guy Joseph, he'll be on in later in this season when this airs. And yeah, and our first call, we've only had a 20-minute chat, and I said, look, I love what you do. He's a Harvard grad, left law, and his whole brand is wise guy. And he said, this is why I laughed when you said that, because his words were, and he looked me up, and I said, look, my show is spiritual. He said, look, you're exotic. And that's okay. Something to that effect. And I love that because I've had to work on that, as you know, and have seen my branding evolve in the last few years, and even the nature of this show as a vehicle, so to speak. And I said to him, I said, look, I really appreciate that because I accept all frameworks, right? It's, if it's exotic or grounded, because like he's saying, what we're saying now, I could speak both hemispheres. I can take it into the biophysical sciences. And so, yeah, I would echo your sentiment that in certain audiences, I have to manage my exotic speak, as Joe, God bless him, said. So his episode, we're going to gear it up towards more of a talk, if we do talk about it, about faith. What does faith mean to him, spirituality in that context? So I agree with you. It depends on the audience. It depends on what part of our collective is ready for what level of expanded awareness, new codex, let's say, or higher dimensional information. And it's not a right or wrong. It's not a science. It's an art.
Thanks.
Right? As you're learning.
Yeah, there is not a right or wrong. There is also nothing wrong if somebody says, Birgit, I can't relate at all to what you're talking about.
Oh, I get that a lot still. A lot of the muggles are still asleep, and they look at me and they go, what?
That's not what I mean. I mean that it's not our responsibility, nor our job.
You're not supposed to teach everybody. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, like I'm not supposed to have anybody understand anything. Like who wants to hear it and is open to hearing it,
correct,
they will receive it. And the others, they can happily go on doing what they're doing, and I hope they can do so happily.
It's interesting you bring this up because the way I've seen it, and Manya and I've talked about this, is it's if you look at David Hawkins' prism of consciousness levels, not that there's better or worse, that there's stations. And that maybe your Birgit is right for only a certain type of engineer audience. And there will be, let's say, other types of Birgits at different stations, consciousness levels, or even different ways of speaking the tone, let's say the substance, not only the amplitude, it would be the actual substance of the codex itself would be different. So I've come to learn that.
Yeah, what I really love about this model is it's kind of the spiral model. Like it starts with that red phase that's very, very basic, like go hunt an animal, blah, blah, blah. I've once seen a really beautiful little illustrative comic movie of that, where it was underlaid with music that would be fitting and with visuals of how much people were interacting and in which way they were interacting with others. And it's almost like, no, it feels to me that we constantly go through these things. Maybe I haven't done all the phases depending on where I am in my development and where I am on my soul journey and whatever you may call it. I can very much relate to all of these phases. There may be a specific activity that I go for, like to stick with that first level example, was underlaid with some hip hop music, the illustration, and I could very much feel that in my body to say, yeah, that's what it's going to be like shaking my booty on a dance floor. And then this very community, pure aesthetic thing where I say, okay, this may exactly where I am at with my vibration when I sit together with a meditation group. And here is this other level, I believe it was depicted in green, where I'm very much about being in communion with the environment, and maybe where I plant some tomatoes and I'm all the way into that. So it's beautiful how it's not, oh, I'm at this one stage of my development. It's more like, we exist in so many different ways and
Yeah.
states, and we can enjoy all of these. That doesn't mean that, oh, once I've kind of learned this new frequency, that means all the others are not good enough. It's like the beauty of the human experience is that it's embracing all of those. Like we can experience all of that in one physical body in one lifetime.
Well, yeah, I hear it as you open yourself up to the spectrum as a whole, and as opposed to partitioning oneself or disconnecting from oneself, which is, yeah, it does lack color, let's say, and it lacks the full spectrum or breadth of the human experience that we can have, which relates to fulfillment and aliveness, which is why lawyers, engineers, doctors, more technical industries tend to have higher rates of suicide, drug abuse, divorce, depression, because they're cutting themselves off because we're cutting ourselves off. And I love that that's how we kind of coming full circle to this. So let's talk about even if you're like, okay, I need hardcore validated sciences, right? That's why I brought you on the show the first time. I was like, breathwork. No matter whether you're a naysayer or advanced person, everybody can agree. Nope, this is a human organic tool that I can use when proverbial shit hits the fan, things get messy. I can always go back to this. And now the science is catching up, realizing heart rate variability, polyvagal tone. So let's start to unpack what we didn't unpack the first episode together, and then wind up for our demonstration portion of the experiential exercise of doing breath work with the intention of either you could use it to modulate, as we're going to unpack on the science now, whether it's I'm having a panic attack, oh, I need to get ready for a creative event, or my whole life's falling apart, oh my God, I need some sanity. So where do you want to start with breath? The breathing, the bliss, where you call it bliss breath, or what is it? What's your title? You call it something? It's like
When I
bliss
teach it
breath.
on Inside Timer, then I teach it, I call it bliss breath work,
That's it. Yeah.
because for many people it instills this untangible sense of bliss. And it is mainly to differentiate it a bit from other types of breath work, where we say we're going all out on the physical for a certain performance indicator or whatnot. So bliss breath work is is a term to denote this could get you to a very elevated experience. It's also very relaxing and gentle on the body.
Would you say my words for what your style is? It's almost like you're speaking to amplitude. I would say you're more of a yin style of breath work, as opposed to some of these. I don't know if my phraseology is capturing what you're intending or encapsulating. And I would say the other, which has become more mainstream, is the more not that it's right or wrong. I feel like I'm resonating more with both these days, more yin, which is what your style is we don't necessarily have to and try to get, Wilhelm Hoffed out all the time, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with our soul brother. God bless him. Is that what you mean,
Both
more or
are,
less, the
yeah,
amplitude? Okay.
both are really valuable. So for
Yes.
example, Wim Hof, he has this beautiful practice that is very physically intense, that can also get somebody to a blissed out state. And it's super good for the immune system, for increasing physical performance and all these things.
More arduous, like
And
you said, intense. It's very like you need to really master your mind, because I
yes,
felt like I was panicking the first time because you don't hold your breath for so long. It's an intensive process. I like that word. Yeah.
exactly. And personally, because I really like working out, I really like being physical. I like climbing, I love acro yoga, I like partner acrobatics, and I love running, I love scaling up mountains. That makes me really happy. From that, I know that many of us will engage more in yang practices than maybe in yin practices. So some of these deliberate relaxation practices may be good to spend a bit more time in. And so for me, that has been a way to bring that to people.
I love that. So my paraphrase of what you said is we live so much as a yang culture or a doing culture, that having a more restorative, to use that scientific word, restorative breath work versus activating breath work, for a lack of a better description.
Yes.
And so that what we're going to do today, as we're going to talk through some of the science real quick before we do it. So that's a good way of, let's say, categorizing it for the audience. If you're new to it, if you're not, I know I teach a lot about this, and I personally am a very yang high rev. So I teach mainly because I need it myself. And I would say that there's a lot of people in society that they're doing kinetic active work, healing modalities. And then there's another side to it. So let's talk about let's start talking about the science real quick, and then maybe juxtapose to the extent that we can. Heart rate variability, HRV. That's a big thing with breath work. That's one thing I've learned is a metric. And the other metric, if I'm not mistaken, is vagal tone. Is there any other metric that we need to unpack today? Or is it those two for now?
Let's start with those two.
Okay, so what is
so
HRV? Let's talk for the audience. Yeah, let's talk about HRV. Start there, kiddo. What's HRV?
So maybe the audience is more familiar with the term of maximum heart rate. So that's the maximum that I can engage with on a physical level before I fall off the stationary bike, because that is a way how it's usually measured.
Heart attack.
Max heart rate. And heart rate variability is how much variance do you have. So even when we don't change our level of activity at a given time, then there will be a variation in how many beats per minute it is. Maybe right now, as you and I are speaking, I am slightly activated. I haven't used a pulse meter in a very long time, so I don't know where I'm actually at. My sense is I'm probably somewhere in between 70 and 90 in our conversation. And it's normal that that varies, and it's actually really good. Like the more variability I have in here, the more physically healthy I am.
Oh, really? So let's slow down. So actually the delta is actually a sign of health. A big delta is a good sign of health. So a big variation and high and low. Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. My brother who passed as a cardiologist, you would think I would know this. I studied to be a doctor in a way back. Now I can tell you, as you continue, I could tell you, I've never actually measured it. I don't have a smart. I can actually feel it. I've gotten to a point where I can tell. I don't know how accurate I am. Oh, I'm in a alpha state now through that. So anyway, so keep going. So HRV, the variant you were saying. Yeah.
So by now, HRV is considered to be one of the best indicators for physical health, heart rate variability. That's the foundation. And when we practice any type of physical exercise, and in that sense, breath work will be counted as part of physical exercise because we do engage in the physical activity.
It's cardiovascular.
Exactly. We increase our heart rate variability. That's the individual piece. And then there is the group piece of it, which means when we practice together, whether that is meditation or yoga or breath work, then through nervous system co-regulation, we also tend to come into brain-heart coherence with other people in a group. Maybe let's not dive too deep into that for right now. I'm going to put a pause. Just
so you're saying individual. I got it, and yeah, I agree with you. We don't have to go too much into that for you. So real quick, let me keep recapping to make sure I'm also tracking and put some cogency as we unpack it more and more. So you are saying for the individual, the heart rate variability is a good measure of your health. And I love what you talked about. We mentioned it earlier, the science word, we haven't said it, the morphogenic field or the morphic resonance, I think is what heart math is starting to call it. When we get into a shared space with other beings, we've seen it in this little pendulum exercise, we start to harmonize. And you talked about our nervous system start to co-regulate is the word, right? We start to almost, the energies start to like go in unison and we start to cycle in unison and breathe and harmonize and all of the circadian rhythm is in unison. Is that a good encapsulation? Okay. So far, so good. All right.
Now, disclaimer for the people who are freaking out in front of a screen right now because they say, I don't want to ever lay in a room with other people doing breath work. That idea freaks me out. This also works doing it digitally together. So whether I do it on a Zoom call or whether I do it on the Insight Timer app, there is a difference.
Where they can't even see us
in a group. Exactly.
We can't even see our audience. It's all digital.
In a group, or whether it's individual. Yes. And then the second piece, the vagal tone. So in our nervous system, we have the sympathicus and the parasympathicus. And the sympathicus is for all the arousal. When something happens, bad message coming in, cortisol in the blood, and then that travels up to the spine. And at the brain barrier, we suddenly give it a different name. We call it epinephrine. And it goes into the cortex, and then it gets what is happening in this moment of arousal. Let's say it's an unpleasant work email. Let's take a very simple example that I believe all of us can relate to at this point.
Yeah, true.
I got an unpleasant work email, and I'm like, and so this comes into my brain, and it is categorized as a threat because I have this cortisol and arousal. And then it gets mapped to previous memory. Oh, do I have something to compare that to from the past? And now here is where the learning comes in. If I've had that a bunch of times in the past, that means I'm getting more and more
used to it.
aroused by that.
Yeah.
It's kind of, we have a highway now in our brain that maps this unpleasant email experience to the 25 that have happened before, and now I'm really aggravated. And then our usual response is a freeze, fight, or flight response. In the example that I'm using, probably fight, because grumpy. And we have the cortisol in the blood, and what usually would happen is it tapers down. Period of relaxation afterwards, some pleasant interaction with colleagues, no harm done, it's fine.
You go back to baseline. Yeah.
We go back to baseline. Now, if I have too many of these things, say, now I'm in a traffic jam on my way home, and then I get into a disagreement with my partner, like whatever it may be. So cortisol keeps getting into the blood, then over extended periods of time, when we have elevated cortisol levels, this becomes super unhealthy for the body on a physical level.
Yeah.
Like premature aging, like bad sleep, all those unpleasant things. Like there's parts that affect
basically like being on
organs
all the time. And it's like,
exactly.
And so two things. One, so if I'm not mistaken, so that's upregulating, right? If I'm not mistaken, if I'm using the term, which means everything starts to activate, all the cortisol, all the beautiful explanation. And so, yeah, and if you're constantly in that mode, you fry out, and
Exactly.
that's upregulated constantly. And I love what you said. It's like a habituation, and then that grew. So all this behavior becomes automatic, and then you're constantly. And then the second thing, correct me if I'm wrong, also the brainwave activity when you're upregulated and in this fight, or fleas, polyvagals, all is also like jankety, right? Versus a more hormone. Not only the HRV is off the heart, also the brain waves tend to be. So everything's like
right. Yeah. So the majority of our brain waves will be in beta waves, and the beta waves are the frequency where we usually get very focused work done, but also very chop, chop, chop style. So it is a very efficient and effective mode of getting things done.
In pieces.
Not so great if we hang out in that all the time. Like that's when it's not beneficial anymore. Yeah. So for periods, stress is okay. Stress is what helps us to get things done, because if we never experienced any stress, we'd probably be vegging out in a hammock all year long.
Well, it drives us. Stress has an evolutionary tool. It's a driver.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an evolutionary driver. And not that there's anything wrong with chilling in a hammock, even a lot of the time. For many of us who are passionate about something, we want to do something about that something. And that means I have some periods of activation where I am in that state, and it's a good thing. And then
let's talk about the other side now. What if you need to down regulate?
Always, is always the amount of it. So now, as in the way how we currently live, especially in Western society and within technology fields, we tend to have a lot of upregulation, a lot of stress, a lot of these states. In order to be able to counterbalance that, getting a good night's sleep is not sufficient anymore. In addition to that, I get to do some restorative practices. And there is quite a plethora of them. For some, it is, I'm going to go to my art studio and paint a picture. I'm going to go walk with my dog for an hour every morning and every evening because I love doing that. I'm going to go meditate and sit. I'm going to go do yoga. I'm going to play with my kids. Like there's many, many different ways of down regulating.
Which is all seem to see the same mechanics. Step away from the stimulus, go do something that actually relaxes you. And in all these examples, the thing you're going towards, the operant stimulus, is actually a positive stimulus that calms you. And whether it be the art, all the examples you use. So to break down the mechanics, keep going. So yeah, you're doing the same thing, only non-specifically, let's say, or non-mechanically, let's say. Yeah.
Yes. And for some of these things, nobody needs instruction. Walk with the dog, go for it. Paint in your studio.
Pick up your poop. There's one instruction. Pick up the dog's poop.
paint in your studio. You can do a lot of beautiful art courses. That's not what I can teach.
True.
Play with your kids, go for it, have fun.
Right.
And then there are other things where people may need a bit of guidance. For example, doing physical yoga practice or meditation or breath work, which is the things that I'm trained in to facilitate. Now, some people feel very self-conscious about doing physical yoga practice, especially if I do offer this in a work environment. Some people are too anxious to sit down and meditate. Fair enough. We all have to breathe. So it turns out
I'll add one more real quick. Let me
work.
interject. Sorry, real quick. There's also one other thing that I started to see culturally, given the eclectic nature of the clients I track. There's actually cultural taboos and stigmas around yoga and meditation, depending on the orthodoxy you may come from, where they're actually known as like dark practices or taboo, or actually taught in front of a bunch of MBAs. One of them was Thai, and she said the way you are teaching visualization is actually a no-no, because they do more of the Vedantic passive meditation. They don't actually use their ajna. And so that's another thing real quick as you're highlighting that I'm like, whereas breath work, there's no taboo, stigma, religious dogma. There's nothing to charge it, is another thing I found, by the way. FYI, I wanted
Depends on how you present it.
Well, you're really good at that. That's the Virgo in you versus the Sagittarius blurted out.
If I were to present it as this breath work is a pranayam that stems from the Vedics, that is out of the yogic disciplines, then there may certainly be some people who have reservations about that, or say, wait, does that mean it's also some kind of religion or something like that?
So I meant the general way you teach it. What I've experienced of you is there's none of that, and it's easy for me as a wide spectrum of humanity to gravitate towards that with less likelihood, as what I'm saying is there's less likelihood of triggering or offense or conditioning being repulsed, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I say that to acknowledge that there are some very, very old traditions and lineages that have used these practices for thousands of years. And not only in yoga, also
don't tell them that. Now the newbies won't do it if they think it's ancient. And then all the Abrahamic covenants will say, what? That's devil worship. No, I'm kidding.
And here is where I can say, well, now that we also have all the science to back it up with from the last decade or two, we can purely argue on that scientific physical level to say, here's why it's beneficial for you, here's how it works, and why don't you try it? And
exactly,
if in the future, at some point down the road, somebody is ever interested in the historic origins of how to use your breath or not, doesn't matter for how beneficial it may be to them in this first little taster session that we're going to do in a few minutes. So what is going to happen is, as we use a certain breathing pattern, it's going to help your body relax. It's going to help you shift from an activated sympathetic nervous system more into the parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to down regulate. It's very relaxing. And it is a way to train your vagal nerve. This is where we tie it back into the vagal nerve that you mentioned at the beginning. The vagal nerve is one of the biggest cranial nerves that we have. It connects all the organs. It's the biggest player within the parasympathetic nervous system. And if this nerve is trained, meaning it knows how to engage and when to engage, it will be more ready to respond if there are stressful events recurring. That means the next time that unpleasant email comes in, you kind of get activated and grumpy. You also can apply one of these restorative techniques, and your vagal nerve will respond better to that, and you will recover more quickly. So in the short term, it makes you recover more quickly. In the long run, it makes you more resilient, because you don't even get that elevated.
Resiliency, capacity, the thing that you talked about that we're also going to do when we do the demo in a moment, which is it also allows you to enter into the relaxed state you mentioned and an expansive state, or let's say a deeper state, which allows for the inner reflection and introspection, which is how we're going to do it today, which is how you do it in some of your classes, which is when you do this, everything you're saying, yes, it restores all this, reconditions you so you have the resilience, and it allows you to get into a state where you can actually look at your inner landscape, to grow or transform or see some things that you may want to see, which I loved when you said, this is how I do it in these classes. I said, ooh, when we do the demo, which is what you all get to experience now. And you said, oh yeah, I definitely want to do it that way. And so anything else before we actually take them through what will be a demonstration of how to do some easy restorative breath work, followed by some reflective questions and prompts Birgit's going to invite us into. Anything else before we actually do the, let's say, the experiential exercise together? About breath work?
Yes,
Or, yeah.
two pieces.
Yeah.
One piece is comment on the last thing you said about the introspection and being able to reflect. That works better if we practice a little longer. So usually my sessions are an hour long.
Okay.
It is a good technique to also use for a 10-minute reset or a 15-minute reset, all these things. To go deeply into reflection mode, it's really nice to have a full hour of that. And we can put a link to a recording for that in the show notes.
So below, I'll put a link to Birgit's on Insight Timer. She has quite a few, or maybe on your site. I forget where you have them listed. And so you can check it out. Could they, quick question, I know you have another point real quick. Could they theoretically so I know people could pause. Could they replay? I know that would take them out of state. Theoretically, could they do that? Or is it a matter of the continuousness without stepping out of it? So like if I open my eyes now that I've said it out loud, thought out loud, if I open my eyes, replayed it, would that take me out of the state that you're saying you would need for about an hour?
Yes, our visual sense is the one that takes in the most information.
Okay.
So we encourage people to practice with their eyes closed. And
So
as
that
soon
won't
as I
work.
open
So they
my
can't
eyes,
replay
especially
it.
with the blue light,
Okay.
it will work
It'll
less.
take you. Well, I agree with you. I not as I said it, I was like, ooh, I would actually take them out of the state of the deeper.
Yeah.
And then I talked over you. You said the blue light. So beautiful point. Didn't mean to speak over you, which she's even alluding to. Then the rays and the technological LED and all this stuff. And it does all these things to the neurons. So go to the link. For now, you get a taste of it. How many minutes do you feel we should do this then? You want to see how it goes? Kind of flow.
I would like to do 7 minutes because that is a beautiful number to do these things for. And
there was a second point I know you said too.
Yeah, the second point was here is when to be cautious about doing it.
Oh, so, disclaimers. Disclaimers. I love disclaimers.
Right. Yeah. Right. So we are deliberately tapping into your parasympathetic nervous system with the intention to downregulate, because we are also activating a bunch of neuroplasticity by doing so. That means you are making new neuronal pathways. We have the potential to rewire and kind of reset our brain. When we talked about those unpleasant email subways, highways.
Pathways. Yeah, the neurosynaptic pathways. Yep.
Exactly. We kind of we can reset, not kind of, we can reset those if we do these practices regularly. So they're powerful. And that means sometimes old emotions can come up.
Thank you.
And
garbage in, garbage out. You may feel what could they feel? So this is the punchline you were getting to. So what could happen? What are the possibilities of this could activate what that they need to be mindful or careful of?
So you may feel some tingling in your body. You may feel tingling in your fingertips. You may feel tension coming up. I even have a couple of people who report getting a bit of a headache. We're only going to do 7 minutes, so likely not too much is going to happen. In general speaking, you can feel quite activated. You can have unpleasant memories come back from a long time ago. And the most important piece is, for any of these, know that it will pass. So if we can let the story go of whatever that is, oh, I'm getting a headache, this is probably unhealthy for me, or I'm feeling tension here, I want that tension to go away. It's like, breathe. You keep breathing. If it gets super unpleasant, obviously take a pause.
Your instincts, yeah.
That's okay. And the other reason why I say this is because of these activations, when we are in a group practice or when I'm physically present with you, it's different. If you're sitting at home in front of a screen right now listening to this episode, if you have a recent diagnosis of active PTSD, if you have
thank you for talking about the trauma
of schizophrenia or bipolar, and that is not currently being treated in a good way, or if you're recently pregnant and you usually don't do this, there's already a lot of magic happening in your body, maybe this is not the time to start on this by yourself. Like, do this with somebody in person who has the
Or
facilitator
guided
capacity for
facilitator.
that, and do it in a guided way.
Yeah.
You're welcome to still relax with us and hang out and simply do slow and deep breathing.
I will add one more, because I've had this literally the other day. I was sitting with a brother I hadn't seen. He was in my old life executive space. And literally all I had him do is put his hand on his heart and breathe. And he started crying. And he remembered some emotional trauma from 9 years old, because I did it intentionally to have him access that, to heal that. And so I add another caveat, which kind of addends what you're saying at the end with the PTSD. If you have trauma, this can, so follow your instincts. It can bring it up for release, which you alluded to. You can get emotional sometimes. So that's another caveat I've seen as well. So trust your instincts. So without further ado, the almighty Miss Birgit, how do we get started? I'm going to be the guinea pig. So if you're at home watching, basically she's going to give the instructions and I'll be the guinea pig on camera. And then ideally follow along at home.
Beautiful. So this is a restorative practice. Do this if you feel that you're in a safe space. Because our visual sense is the one that takes in the most information, I want to invite you to close your eyes. If you have the opportunity, I want to invite you to lay down. If you cannot lay down right now, then sit back in your chair, relax, find a way to support your back so that you don't have to actively hold your body in any position. Your arms, if you're laying down, can be by your side and palms facing up to the ceiling. If you're sitting, then maybe place them on your thighs in a comfortable way so that you don't have to hold anything. And then we're going to take a deep clearing breath. So inhale all the way deep into the belly, and then exhale with a sigh loud out the mouth. Ah, good. We'll do 2 more of those, because sighing audibly is a signal to our nervous system that it's safe to relax. So another deep inhale in the belly. Ah. And then the third one, because there's a charm in all old fairy tales. Inhale deeply. Ah. Good. And then from here, we're going to follow a breathing pattern. We're going to be breathing all through the mouth, because that way it's easier to let go of your thinking mind for a few minutes. And because it's easier to breathe deep into the belly that way. It's a 3-part breath. First, deep inhale goes into the belly. Second inhale goes into the chest, all through the mouth. And the third is an exhale. So I'm going to demo it once. Inhale belly. Inhale chest. Exhale. So you simply follow that pattern. If your body wants you to do this a tad more slowly or a tad more quickly, because we all have different lung capacity, you follow the guidance of your body. I am the facilitator. The real teacher is your body and your breath. Let's do it together. Inhale belly. Inhale chest. Exhale. 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 Good. Continue with that breathing pattern. And if your mouth gets dry, remind your glands to salivate. That's a normal thing. If your head kicks in, drop those thoughts. Focus on the physical sensations in your body. Inhale belly. Inhale chest. Exhale. 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 Belly. Chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Good. Continue. You're doing really well. And relax whatever muscles you don't need for the breathing right now. There's no need to hold any tension. Let it go. Trust yourself. You got this. Inhale belly. Inhale chest. Exhale. 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 You're doing good. You're almost there. Inhale belly. Inhale chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Last few breaths. Go 10% deeper into the belly if that feels okay. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. Belly. Chest. Exhale. And then with your next inhale, fill yourself up all the way to the top. And at the very top, gently pause your breath. And then feel into that sweet, sweet nothingness of not doing anything. No movement in your body. Everything relaxes. This pure state of being. And there may be some natural response from your body, like yawning or even giggling. All of that is welcome. Whatever is coming through, it's welcome. And pause that breath for as long as is okay for your body. So there is no need to hold and struggle. As soon as you notice you're beginning to struggle, you can go ahead and release that breath. And then when you've released that breath, allow yourself to sink a little more into the back of your body. And we're going to relax here for about a minute. And this is your little integration phase. So at the end of all these practices, we allow our body to rest, to receive the benefits of the practice. So I invite you to open your heart and allow yourself to receive. And then when you feel complete for now, you can put a hand on your heart and one on your belly and slowly come back into your body. You can thank yourself for having the courage to do a little practice and to be present with yourself. Whenever you're ready, you can blink your eyes back open. And some of the aftercare for this practice, especially if we do a full practice and do it longer, is to hydrate really well, because we breathe through the mouth, so we lose a little more hydration than usually. Hydrate really well. If it feels like a lot of stuff has been going on, it might be really nice to get into some salt water. Jump into an ocean if you can. If not, an Epsom salt bath is beautiful. And if that is not available, then a shower is also a really nice way to rinse off the energy in a physical and other way. And if you have the time to journal a bit, that often helps to bring things through a little bit more that we started feeling and noticing during the practice. So it's almost like a channeling practice if you're a bit more into spiritual practices, and it's kind of a good reflective process and release if we want to look at it from a psychological standpoint. Welcome back.
Beautiful. So technically, I saw a article, I'll put it in the link as well, high ventilation breathwork practices, an overview of their effects, mechanisms, and considerations for clinical applications. When I saw this, I said, I'm going to save it, put it in the description, because I have a feeling Miss Birgit will love it. And I sure know that the members of the engineering community that come through you as an audience, or even that come through me, I have a lot of engineer friends, will appreciate that there's some validity. Don't only take our words for it, take the scientific community's word for it. If there were to wrap up on this, if there were a couple of, because I know you do this with your students, if there were a couple of prompts, let's say they're new to this and they wanted to reflect. So let's say they finished and then we haven't talked. What types of questions or prompts? I feel like I'm not as good as this as maybe you would be, given your nature.
So what I would always start with is with processing whatever I experienced during the session. And the easiest point to tap in for everybody is, what were the physical sensations that I was feeling in my body? And then what often happens when I start journaling about this is I will spell out all the stories that I associate with that. And that's kind of, aha, interesting. So let's say I saw you moving a little bit with your neck. So maybe there was some tension there. And like, not to go into interpretation, it's more a prompt for curiosity. I'm like, oh, I noticed during my breath session, I felt some tension in my neck. And then I start writing about that and go as specific as I can about the physical sensation, whether it felt a bit crampy or whether it felt like, oh, there is kind of a brick back there, or whether it was some more, oh, it was kind of wiggly there and I don't know where that came from. Describe it as precisely as we can, and then we will usually have more information coming through. For other people, that may be because, oh, I felt some tingling in my fingertips, or I felt a real strong tension around my jaw. Or some people who are more visually tapped in, maybe, oh, I saw a picture of something or other coming in front of my mind. I have noticed that for me, those pictures tend to come more during the relaxation period at the end than during the active part of the breath work. So I strongly recommend to always do the relaxation period at the end. And if in doubt, give it a couple of minutes more there. That's better than doing it too shortly, because a lot of information can come through that way. So first important piece for the reflection is to be really curious about that experience that just happened. And the second piece could then be, what kind of meaning do I associate to that? Like, how do I interpret that? And
I would say restorative practices take us into natural healing states, because healing is automatic and
yes.
science is catching up. So I knew I had a energetic implant there that I've been healing, as well as a biophysical spinal fusion thing going on. So I could tell you, because what for me, and I've known this given how masterful and how many millions of hours of practice I've done in this human form. So I started with my Qigong instructor because he was trained in the traditional style and he was an occultist in secret societies to boot. So he was very disciplined given all of these trainings. And when I would yawn, he would actually, he was like trained to scold me, given that he came from this ancient, really stoic lineage of Kung Fu style of Qigong and Tai Chi. And I realized then in 2017, because I love how you've mentioned it throughout this episode, you got to understand yourself. Each person unpacks, has a natural rhythm. Each person will process, you receive your visual downloads at the end. Some people may. So what I started to realize is I'll actually release a lot through yawning energetically. I process energy really quickly. This isn't my interpretation because other teachers and people have told me that. So it starts to objectively become more, let's say, of an axiom as opposed to me subjectively thinking it. And so what I started to realize is when you do these restorative practices, we actually get out of our own way, and then healing can automatically happen. And these bioelectromagnetic forces can go through and self-organize, and the cellular structure will self-organize. So I oftentimes, because now I don't think anymore, I will release it. So yeah, I kind of knew. I was like, oh wow, she's helping me release. So you get out of your own way, the cells and energies and the biosystems self-organize. So that's the response on a very high level. I know we were intending to keep it more on the let's say the beginning end of the spectrum with the prompts. And I like what you said. There is interpretation. Some could say, well, that's your interpretation. We don't know objectively what is an energetic implant, and we'll forego that for now. So I'll say that's my experience of what happened, for lack of
exactly. And that's perfect. And nice that you pick up on the yawning for that, because the yawning piece for the people who say, oh, what do you mean, like energetic release through yawning? That's a bit far out there for me. Science has shown that yawning helps us shift states. It is a way to help us shift into that parasympathetic relaxation response. So it will help us relax. It is a shift in energy state, by the way. It does not mean you're tired. It means you're shifting towards a more relaxed state that may or may not be along with being tired.
Speaking of credentials and certifications, it probably helps that I was pre-med, studied under Dr. Ramachandran, who is the guy who on Nova created phantom limb research and understood neuroplasticity before we ever knew it mainstream. So it's funny because science is barely scratching the surface of what, let's say, the ancient masters used to know. So it's funny to me that we need this validation at times. Even I laugh at myself at times that I need the validation, because I do sometimes seek it still. Is this affirmed? Is this a fact? How do we know this? As opposed to what you're inviting us into, trusting your own experience of it. If it's working, if the impact is being had, go with it. Trust your instincts and go with it.
I think what the really helpful part about the empirical evidence is that it is a second or third person account to say,
I like
here,
that.
for somebody who hasn't had the chance to experience that
I take that
in first person, this is what we have seen. And so for some people, depending on their worldview and their perspective, that is then a more credible invitation to try something out.
I like that. I would say, like, there's learning experts now, and I've seen some of these being connected with as peers, and I'm learning in the frontiers of learning. Our concept of learning, there's different types of learning, as I'm even learning about learning. And so I think that's what you're speaking to. It's how we learn, and then we get closer to experiential wisdom, our own knowledge base. So I like how you did that. That's like the invitation to get there. It's like the first step is, okay, well, at least the science can give me a warm up to it. I like that. It's a good reframe for my judgmental self. Sometimes my verbiage, my EJ, your EP is much more facilitative, even if you like to disagree with that psychometric.
I don't agree with the metric per se. I know that it is one that tends to change over time, and it can change as quickly as within 3 months, and I haven't done that test in a while.
What I mean is our styles tend to be in that way. I've noticed that about you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, thank you. Any parting words, anything you feel inspired to share before we wrap up today? I feel like this, I feel complete with what I had to share and where I wanted to guide us and what felt inspired. Do you have any, let's say, parting words, final things that have dropped in to round us out?
Yes, right this moment, as you're asking this, what's dropping in is some of the stuff still takes courage to own, both for me within my professional world, as well as maybe for many of the leaders that are watching this and wondering, well, how am I going to integrate some of this that I want to stand for in my line of work that may be very traditional and traditionally not interested in this kind of work. And what I've noticed is also pay attention to what feels really uncomfortable and then get curious about why there is discomfort there. So that has helped me a number of times to realize, where did I not have a clear line of explanation, for example, or where did I feel that I didn't have the right words in that moment to explain something. And that has helped me tremendously to say, okay, what I need is, for example, a person who is super critical of any spiritual practices, and talk to them about what they disagree with most, or to kind of practice my scientific version of the explanation on them and see whether there is anything that they disagree with or that made them feel uncomfortable. And I encourage you to, all of you who are listening out there, to be curious enough to go explore, be passionate enough to trust that what you're contributing is unique and valuable, and to have fun while doing it. Stay playful and find the joy.
I love that. That's a really good way of rounding it out, because I find that even in my own practice a few years ago, I'll give an example I dropped in, is a colleague reached out to me when I was at the forefront of the integrative law movement. It's like bringing these into my legal practice. This is in like 2013. She reached out, she said, look, I've heard of you. How do you do this? And I went gun ho. Like, oh, you could do this, and that. And she was not ready for that. God bless her. And it's like, for some, man, I love how you worded it. For some, it may not look like what Haas and Birgit are doing. It's going to take a unique form for you. It's going to be your own medicine. And it's actually funny, because this dropped in the other day. I'll read it because I saw this and I loved how this lady had worded it. And I love how you're inviting in the exploration and the play. It's right here. Let me read this, because I think this is a good rounding out of what you even said. You have your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. That's the phrase that I saw. You have your own unique medicine, each of you. And I love how you brought it out, because that's very much an axiom of this show with the work I do. And I think that's an intersect of where we both have a passion for awakening leaders to look, however you do it, however it looks, be playful, be curious, have the courage to dive into it, and know that what it's going to look like for you is going to look like differently, or different form, shall we say. So I love that invitation. Birgit, it's a pleasure. Thank you for staying up late. You're in Sweden, right? I always get the country wrong. You travel so much. So thank you for staying up late, past the normal business hours, shall we say. And thank you for sharing more of yourself. It's truly an honor to know you on the journey, and for what you're doing out there to awaken the engineering space, the tech space, and for doing it as long as you have. It's not easy. It's not easy to do this work. And I'm grateful for how you're showing up and how you're up leveling in those ways. So
thank you so much. I very much enjoyed being here and being hosted by you again, and I look forward to the future and the past to unfold.
We all do, and we trust you all will be back. And I hope you found this both informative, insightful, inspiring, and passionate. Join us again for the next episode. We are really grateful that you're with us today, and you're with us on this journey. And wherever you're at on your journey, as she said, whether you need the empirical data, that's fine. I honor all of your processes. Or whether you're more advanced and you still have, let's say, corners that you haven't explored, explore, be curious, embrace that wonder. And until next time, we'll see you back here on the Vulnerable Power Show.